let's talk about this conversation about cutting the military budget. In the past, generally, anyone who talks about making cuts, even minor ones, is presented as someone who's effectively surrendering to America's enemies. It's going to leave us defenseless. All the context that we've spoken about how much we spend in comparison to all of the other, effectively the close allies combined. How do you see it shaping out now? Is the pandemic going to be an influence on how people interpret whether it makes sense to cut the military budget? Has the country shifted in some way? What do you think is likely to happen?
Well, it's difficult to say for sure. I think that the pandemic has opened a lot of people's eyes to what is really a threat to American lives. And if you read the Trump administration's justifications for why the budget has to go up and up, I mean, Trump says at a level, we have to rebuild the military, and the military was never in disrepair. But if you read the actual policymakers in the Trump administration and their justifications for why the budget has to go up and up, it has to do with competition with China and competition with Russia. Great power competition, the need to build large weapon systems to modify our nuclear arsenal and modernize it. And I think a lot of Americans nowadays, even non-progressive Americans would question whether that's really at the forefront of our concerns, or whether that's really even at the forefront of threats to American lives. So yeah, I think that's going to be a big part of the conversation. But there's a long way to go on the budget. You mentioned the CDC earlier. One interesting fact is that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, under Obama, not even under Trump, every year, the EPA had a smaller annual budget than the F-35 program alone in the Pentagon. So, I mean, you're talking about huge budget shifts to get to that level of proportionality.
Yeah, and I know in your article you talk about Representative Ro Khanna acknowledging that this does need to be messaged very carefully because of the possibility that the right could try to exploit it. And I wonder in this particular time where Donald Trump, he is sort of flailing in his reelection campaign. He's had a number of different, sort of own goals around the pandemic, his response to the protests. This seems like something that they might find to be very familiar, like almost comfortable, that they could start to run on the Democrats being against the military effectively. And I get what you're saying, that people seem to have a new idea of what the actual threats are. And so I just want your gut. Do you think that for Donald Trump could be a way to inspire a little bit of his base, to demonize the Democrats as being sort of naive when it comes to national security?
I think as a matter of politics, your point is correct. But I think Trump will say that no matter what the Democrats' position on the military budget actually is.
Exactly.
I think that for Trump and for Republican messaging generally, the softness of Democrats in the national security space has nothing to do with whether the military budget is $600 billion or whether it's $700 billion. I don't think that's going to change fundamentally. I think that if progressives, though, if they want to move forward the conversation of actually making cuts, instead of these sort of yearly automatic increases, they need to come to the table and they need to start identifying what's actually going to get cut. Where are you going to scale down the US military presence overseas? Which bases are you going to close? Which weapon systems are you going to cancel or scale back? Those types of things. This measure by Sanders and Markey and other ones by like the resolution introduced by Barbara Lee, those pieces of legislation don't really make those calls. They don't really wade into that territory. So I think that's probably the next step.
Yeah, and we should point out, and you sort of alluded to this, that these cuts, which hypothetically will be presented as being radical, just sort of get us back to the status quo of not that long ago. It's not like when anti-war activists or activists who have been pushing their entire lives for scaling back military spending, they generally are not calling for 10% or 14% cuts in military spending. They want our military spending to be in line with what other countries spend, which, as you which you pointed out, is far, far lower. And so, I'm glad that this conversation is being opened up, but this certainly doesn't go as far as some people would probably want it to.
Right. Well, at the root of what that conversation is about what the U.S. role in the world was. You have a lot of people who are calling for, Barbara Lee's resolution, for example, calls for $350 billion worth of cuts. That's basically taking us down to pre 9/11 levels. And so that's a statement that's saying essentially the US role in the world should be similar to what it was before 9/11. When the US was, a lone superpower and had relatively small military engagements. Now the people, even within the Democratic Party, who are calling for defense increases are really saying that the US needs to step it up militarily to confront China. And that's at the center of the debate now. So it's a debate about what the US role in the world should be, and what the capabilities are that we either need to build up or scale back to get there.
Yeah, well, that's obviously a big conversation. Perhaps at some point we can delve back into that. But Alex Emmons, national security reporter for The Intercept, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.